Hello, you guys, and welcome to the Dr. Cecilia Pederson podcast. My name is Miya, but you probably all know me more formally as at Dr. Cecilia Pederson on all social media platforms. It is a thrill and joy to be here with you all today. I am really excited about this concept. I'm not necessarily committed to it long term because I want to see several things. I want to see how it's received. I want to see the engagement with it. And I want to see if this is something that I feel passionate about and I like. This is not really sort of my, I haven't done a lot of like voiceover or radio or interview style stuff in my sort of artistic training. So this is a little bit new for me. But I also want to see how I feel about it. But we'll try a couple episodes and kind of see what we think. If 2 to 3 of you listen to this regularly, I will still do it. I would love to. When I make content here on the DCP page, whether it's one person that's engaging with something or thousands and thousands and thousands viewing it, it all means the same to me. If content and what I have to say or make artistically impacts even one person, then it is so worth it to me. So if it's a really small group of you that like this podcast setting, I feel like my age is showing here. My age group, late 20s into early 30s, I'm 28, likes podcasts a lot, but I'm not sure how the younger generations do. But I do feel like podcasts in general are kind of a universal thing that every age can enjoy. Also, from a logistics perspective, this gives me the opportunity to sit down in a concentrated setting and record something on weeks I might be traveling a lot or I'm singing a lot or I don't have time to sit down and film a formal, Instagram story thing. Because, when I react to edits and when I talk to you guys about film and stuff, I love making those Instagram stories, but not everyone is on Instagram stories every day. Not everyone is engaged with Instagram stories. I don't always have the time to fill them. And so this is kind of a nice spot where I can make, I think, sort of a concentrated area of responses and analyses and behind the scenes or really whatever you guys want. So I have a couple topics in mind for the first few episodes, but if you guys have topics, of course, feel free to let me know. So for our first kind of brief episode today, these will not be super long, by the way. There's no way if it's just me, I'm going to talk for an hour. But if it's another guest, that's a whole other conversation. So today I want to talk about villains, specifically Cecilia Pederson as sort of the newest villain installment within the Saw franchise. Now, obviously, we don't know anything yet about Saw 11. We don't know who's in it. It sounds like it's been definitely confirmed, at least in my last Google, but not many details released yet. So hopefully we see Cecilia Pederson again. I think that would be fantastic. And I think Sonova would smash it, as she always does. But I sort of want to touch on why I think, in particular, Cecilia Pederson is such a successful villain within the Saw franchise. Because Cecilia is not really the first person to try to question John or get under his skin, but all of the attempts we have seen prior to Cecilia Pederson were kind of a flop. I'm primarily referencing sort of anyone in the cop and detective storyline in particular. I recognize not everyone listening to this episode may know the deep lore of every Saw film. So I'm going to try to keep the details not too specific in case, people want to watch the whole franchise. And I think you should. Saw X is in my top 2 for sure, but I still go back and watch many movies from the whole franchise because you have 10 to choose from now. But in terms of Cecilia, so there's sort of 3 big topics I want to touch on. One is that Cecilia is a nuanced villain. Number 2 is that her evil persona and her evil actions have kind of an arc. It doesn't all of a sudden just start, at level 100 at the beginning. There's sort of a natural growth. And then number 3 is she has somewhat of an origin story. Even if we don't know the details specifically, we know or can at least insinuate what that might be. So I think those 3 factors make First of all, any villain, fantastic, but specifically a Saw villain, because it takes a lot to sort of upstage is not the word I'm looking for here, but to sort of match John Kramer's evil and energy. And Tobin Bell has established himself as one of the greatest horror actors, if not actors in general, of all time. I think his work is brilliant. I think he is so talented and gifted, and he's so lovely to all of the fans. And he is really one of the main reasons this franchise has been so successful for so long. And I think him coming back for Saw X, despite his age and everything, was a huge factor as to why it did so well. So I think it's hard to write and create and cast a villain. I'm kind of just guessing here, but if I were, Kevin or anybody else, I feel like it would be tricky to create and cast and write a villain to sort of match his energy that doesn't come across in a cheesy or non-genuine way. But of course, in true Saw fashion, they nailed it, and Sonova, of course, knocked it out of the park. Absolutely spectacular performance of Cecilia Pederson. Phenomenal. So let's go into these three kind of subcategories. So Cecilia Pederson is nuanced. Now, there are a lot of villains out there, and I don't even just mean silly cartoon villains, but I mean like real film villains too, that don't have a lot of nuance. And I find that sort of flat dimensioned energy and lack of humanity, because every villain, even real life villains, have some amount of humanity or things that make them human. When that's not present, it's really hard to sort of relate to or get attached to a villain, at least for me, because yes, they're evil, yes, they're diabolical, yes, their actions are, horrendous, but they're still human, and there's facets of them that make them human. There's facets of being human that make all of us human, regardless of who is quote unquote good or bad. And that's kind of uncomfortable to sit with. And so I think if a villain is a little too larger than life or non-nuanced or doesn't have any sort of vulnerability or whatever that might be, that's hard for audiences to relate to, because it's already going to feel tricky, I think, for an audience member to relate to or necessarily jive with a villain in general, because their guard is going to be up. So I think Cecilia's nuance here, and I guess what I'm getting at with the word nuance, I should probably explain what I mean by that. Cecilia's nuance, I mean in terms of her mannerisms, the way she portrays herself, the way she holds herself. Sonova's as Cecilia really, I think, has sort of three masks going on in Saw X. We have goody two-shoes Cecilia at the front, being very warm and genuine, but that's the thing. It does not feel like an act. It feels so genuine. I cried so hard when the whole sequence with "your whole life" happens then, and him thinking he's better for 5 minutes. That destroyed me. I honestly am at the point where when I watch Saw X again, I don't think I can watch that sequence because it destroys me so much, because the acting between Sonova and Tobin Bell is off the freaking charts. And then the whole sequence where he realized he's been scammed. I haven't been able to watch that for like 3 watches now, because it like physically pains me so much. That is brilliant acting, to be able to make me feel so uncomfortable that I don't want to watch John Kramer suffer for a 9th time. That's brilliant acting. So when Sonova as Cecilia in the beginning is warm and kind, and she even touches John like on the back multiple times, you believe her, even though if you watch the trailer, you know that that's not what she's really like. And then we slip into this sort of like, okay, yeah, I'm a fraud and I'm a piece of crap, blah, 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 but like, I can still heal you. Let me call my dad. Let me help my colleagues in their traps. Sounded like I just made up a Saw X rap. What was that? Oh my gosh. But seriously, then we kind of get like a slightly different Cecilia, and you believe her. Again, she's like coaching Valentina through the trap. She's screaming at Mateo to get it together and use the craniotom, right? She's quote unquote helping Gabby by telling her to start with her foot, right? And then in this third act of Saw X, then we see the real Cecilia. I just want to take a second, you guys. That takes so much focus and talent and work and nuance and just innate understanding of what it means to be human, and I mean, Cecilia had a lot of dialogue. That's a lot of dialogue to memorize. I mean, I really want to take a second and commend Cenova's performance because Cecilia was a massive role and it was tons of dialogue and Sonova was really juggling like kind of these three versions of Cecilia and not once did I feel like she wasn't believable. Like every second her face was on screen, I was so captivated in a horrible way because Cecilia is so awful, but Sonova just nailed that nuance. I mean, she just nailed it. It it's just it's so good. Okay, moving on. So for point number 2, let's talk about the sort of arc of Cecilia. So let's pretend the film starts and we don't see Cecilia like trick John or anything like that. Let's say we see her like try to hurt or kill somebody, right? That is already starting us as the audience at like point 100, right? Going from like 100 to 100,000. It's too much. And there's a time and place for that, right? Like I think of like the Batman movies or other kind of superhero movies where we do start with a very intense like villain moment. I think there's a time and place for that and I think it works when it works. I don't think that would have worked here. And what I love so much about the writing and acting, in particular with Cecilia, is we get this very gradual, natural arc. So, first it's scamming for a little bit of money. Well, not a little, let's be real, it's a lot. Scamming people for money, but like I'm not actually hurting them kind of a vibe, right? And then it's let me I don't want this episode to get taken down, so I'm going to try to describe this very gently. Let me take Valentina's various parts and do something with it. We'll leave it at that. And for rope purposes, and then it escalates to let me step on Gabriella's neck, and then it escalates to let me put an innocent child in a trap designed to kill somebody. So we have a very natural progression. And I did read some stuff on fan forums. I try to avoid those because people can get it's like way too serious. It's like, it's just a movie, you guys. But I did see some people be like, it seemed like almost too much that Cecilia would do all of that. And I was kind of like, I mean, I guess I could see why someone would say that, but also simultaneously, why wouldn't she? She has established that she is a diabolical woman. I mean, because here's the thing, by robbing people of hope and taking their money, she is still killing them. Did she physically like lay a hand on them? No, but she still is by proxy killing them. And so it doesn't surprise me that if she already has, right, that established pattern of behavior, why would she not continue to escalate it? Unfortunately, of course. So I like that overall arc that Cecilia has of like, she starts off plenty evil, but it progresses in this huge way that's a threat. And when it's a threat to our main character who we love and adore so much, then that causes the audience to panic and it creates great storytelling and, XYZ, blah, blah, blah. Lastly, origin story. So I want to touch on this very briefly, but I do want to touch on it because this is tricky because had we not, right, gotten the deleted scenes, I don't know how well I'd be able to answer this question because we didn't really know much about Finn and Cecilia before the deleted scenes came out. Then those dropped and it was like, oh my God, Finn was a horrible father. Cecilia clearly has familial trauma that has likely somewhat informed why she is the way she is. I mean, that's huge. Every villain has an origin story. And I'm just not saying fictional villains either, like real life villains. In fact, my brain always goes to that Ryan Murphy TV show that came out here in the States last year about Dahmer that did very, very well. And I watched the whole thing. And even though I'm not really into true crime too much, but I watched the whole thing and the whole time I was like, this man's origin story, of course it doesn't defend everyone he hurt and killed, especially considering he targeted primarily queer black men, which is awful. But it made me think, every person has an origin for their evil, and Dahmer had his and Cecilia has hers. The problem is we as the audience don't have an explicit picture of that. And part of me is kind of grateful we don't. Maybe we will at some point, but I kind of weirdly like the mystery of not knowing, because if Finn was like really, really bad to her, like I feel like that would just, oh, it's just so sad. And it complicates things because it doesn't defend Cecilia Pederson, right? Like I've said about my Father Forgive Me edit, but it makes this a much more challenging discussion. So I appreciate even without the deleted footage, we still have somewhat of an origin story for Cecilia, but I'm going to argue the deleted footage really makes it, because it's like, horrible dad, I grifted up his name because she touches on this idea of revenge. Like screw you, I'm going to get revenge. And, I didn't add revenge as a fourth point to this kind of 3-point discussion, but revenge actually is a great sub point to what makes a villain a great villain, because oftentimes villains are seeking out revenge. Not always, but very often. And I'm going to throw out there that I actually think Cecilia is exacting her revenge on 3 groups of people. Her father, clearly, so much bitterness towards him that we see in the deleted scenes, and Sonova's incredible performance, of course. She wants revenge on John Kramer because, I want him to suffer like he made me suffer. And maybe she wants a little revenge on her colleagues because they were taking some money from her that she wanted that cash, And she says to John in the deleted scenes, right? Like, she says something like, and now you want revenge. And he goes, you're wrong about that. And she goes, there's no shame in that. There's no shame in that, John. There's no shame in revenge. And I kind of love that. Not in like a, oh, this is such a positive thing. No. But I love that in the sense of it gives us so much insight into Cecilia. And I think how much of her actions are driven by revenge, which is kind of a subpoint of origin story. So again, what makes Cecilia Pederson such a great Saw X villain? She has nuance and a lot of humanity in her, even though she's awful. She has a great sort of villain arc from starting off evil, but then progressing to more darker forms of evil. And then number 3, she has an origin story that also is sort of based in revenge. I think these are all things that make any villain great, but especially in this particular context, Cecilia Pederson. Thank you guys so much for joining the Dr. Cecilia Pederson speaking. How many times have I said Cecilia Pederson? Cecilia Pederson, Barker's ears. Thank you so much for joining me on this first episode of the podcast. I had a lot of fun recording this and hope you guys found this interesting. Again, I'll try to keep these relatively short, but I really enjoy sharing my insights and thoughts, and I really appreciate the positive feedback of like, I want to see more about edits or behind the scenes or your thoughts on stuff. So let me know what you think of this, and until next time, bye.